the user and entity behavioral analysis, where SINET is unique in this industry is around network traffic. So we bring in and analyze network traffic at the endpoint. We also provide deception technology. In terms of response automation, we are all about automation. You're going to see a tremendous amount from SINET in 2022 on automation. And the automation is obviously in the platform itself. It's allowing security experts at our customers and our partners to automate and manually intervene and remediate, and also investigate, okay? The last leg of this stool is the human element, that MDR capability. So we have a team of cybersecurity experts that are going to monitor critical events at any customer of SINET. Those cyber experts are there for the remediation. They are there for consultation throughout the process. They are there to make sure that any of the customization in terms of remediation is taken care of, and that's what they do. They are there. All three of these aspects of the product, the blue, the green, and the red here, that's a single SKU that SINET offers to their customer base. Very well priced. That's another huge component of our offering, is where we've priced this. intiGrow would love to show you what this A, the product does, and B, the price point. And the last thing I'll just say is look at us, Google us, see what we're doing, see who loves us, see why they love us. We're getting all sorts of accolades. We're a very young company. We're 6 years old, and we are just doing a tremendous job in terms of the public reception of this company. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt and Jim. And Matt, thank you for being a customer. And Matt and Jim, take it away.
All right, great. Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. I guess you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I also was going to mention I have never seen SaaS security, all modules, regardless of vendor, managed from a single pane of glass. I think that's something you guys just instituted as well, right? Posture management. So that's kind of an interesting, I guess, nuance, if you will. All right, so hi everybody. Thanks very much for spending some time with us. We're just going to talk. This is kind of a fun dialogue for us, I think, because normally we're talking about technical stuff or compliance stuff or something related to the SOC or identity management or any other number of cloud related items, whatever it might be. Today we're here just to have some fun. So my friend Matt and I, Matt was good enough to kind of join us, and really we thought it would be fun just to talk about vetting, kind of vendor Q&A, how we vet and qualify organizations to be part of, kind of the fray, if you will, what the steps are oftentimes for people to go through that. And I'll represent, I'm going to MC a little bit, but I'll also kind of represent the vendor side of that and explain some of the things that we often go through. Hopefully this can provide, maybe a nugget of information that might be helpful if you're out there looking for something. The way I like to look at it for, companies that work with global systems integrators and resellers like us that do, pretty much all security integration and managed service stuff. Hopefully it'll give you a little purview into what might be helpful and some questions and process stuff that you might want to go into. So if that sounds okay, Matt, welcome.
Sure.
Thanks very much for coming today.
You mentioned all the other things that we could talk about, and I love talking about those things too. I'm very technical, so maybe another time for those topics.
Yeah. Oh, we certainly can. Thanks. Yeah, I think we have some known folks who are folks that I know on the call today. So there's a lot of brain power on this call. I can tell you that much. So, yeah. So yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, so just really quickly, about me, so you guys know who I am and why my opinion I think matters in this call. Allianz is, I think, the third largest insurer in the world, right? So I run security operations for most of Allianz. We have 260 sub companies, that kind of stuff. We're a very, very large organization. I'm also an executive in America for Allianz as a global exec. So I get involved in procurement and vendor decisions, as well as large RFPs, things like that. And I think, Jim asked me to come and talk about vendors and how we do selection and all that kind of stuff. I think for me, I've got two backgrounds. We've got, of course, Allianz, which I've done for about 6 years. Then prior to that, I was also helped build companies that did services and integration, as well as reselling and consulting, right? So I've got a bit of both sides as well, of what it's been like to be a vendor in some cases and a consultant doing strategic planning for this too. But at Allianz, I think the big thing about us is size, right? So if you want to try to get into a global enterprise customer, there's a bunch of stuff you have to do. And, we can talk about that. There's a lot of the mechanics of it that I think we don't really need to talk about, how you get selected to be on the list, or how you go through the paperwork, making sure what you have. I don't think that's as important. I think what we look for, and like you said earlier, about SINET, we do have SINET as a solution that we've deployed. We've deployed most of it. It's actually the largest, I'd say the most deployed piece of software at Allianz, even more than Windows, right? So it's on every endpoint that we own. And I think it's a good thing for us to talk about. So, and I know, and I don't want to spoil your questions. I think you had a few questions you wanted us to go through, so.
Absolutely. Yeah, no worries. It looks like we have, okay. Oh, okay. I'm looking in the chat. It's if you have any questions. Okay, good. Yeah, so I think, what we go through, Matt, like you said, and it's our pleasure to work with many Fortune 100 companies kind of around the Americas and around the world. I think probably a lot of folks on the line here have probably been involved in some of these processes to make conclusions and comparisons. From your perspective, and we can probably get a lot of input ultimately and questions from the audience here, because it's a very senior level group. Okay. But we often are asked to satisfy requirements, both as an integrator, and like you said, there's a lot of security checklists that we must go through now, especially if we're doing anything federal, anything that touches a compliance issue, et cetera, heavily regulated industry. Oftentimes are asked to go through kind of an ROI model with folks to help them, I think, internally case justify. We go through proofs of concept. We go through, POCs or POFs or POVs, right? Proof of value. Are there other areas there that are sort of critical for you in terms of what you guys look at? I mean, there's obviously services and costs aligned with that. But just as I guess I would say a critical, qualifier or hurdle, are there other types of things that you think are valuable?
I mean, so price does enter into it. I mean, we have 500,000 endpoints. Yep. So, you have to think about that. You also have to think about how many agents you put on an endpoint, right? So if you've got 6 different vendors on one endpoint, each with their own agent, and it's, $15, $10 an endpoint, something like that, it becomes very, very large math very quickly, and it becomes computationally expensive, right? To keep loading agents and things like that onto endpoints. So you think about that from a business perspective. You've got no choice. Even some of the other ones that have a multiple stack endpoint on there can get quite expensive, especially across the enterprise. So I mean, that's definitely on the list. I think more important than that, when we look at regulatory drivers, we buy, basically twice a year, large products, whole platforms for this. We look at regulatory drivers and other things that are gaps in the space that help us fill, I kind of call an emerging need, right? So EDR came onto our radar last year. Before that, now, XDR is coming up. And now we've got zero trust and a few other things that are popping into the agenda list. You look at how the regulators are driving, and for a global enterprise, you look at how the governments and the regulations are starting to require checkbox items for certain things in the endpoint and how you do response. So you take that, you compare it to your portfolio, then you do exactly what you said, which is to run proof of concept, proof of value to see, is this going to satisfy? And we often pick 3 vendors from a list and then go for a POC, then a POV, and start rolling it into production. We'll take sub companies or countries and onboard and try for a proof of concept, proof of value. And I think the most successful vendors have been the ones that can work with those teams and show value in that POV. And this is often a tight time frame, maybe 6 months to really show value. And Allianz, just like a lot of the large enterprises, are heavily bureaucratic. So getting a server into Iraq or something like that is a 3-month adventure. It's not like a cloud migration might be in the modern enterprise. And we're starting to see that. We're starting to see more cloud and SaaS offerings. But Allianz, as are most old companies, we're 135 years old, are very slow to adopt what we'll call pure cloud, fully software as a service, platform as a service as well, environments where you might have compromised keys or other governments that even want your data. So we tend to hold things still in more of a private cloud or hybrid cloud scenario. So a lot of the vendors that we look for also can support that type of environment. So it's not fully cloud ready, not out there, and that sort of thing. So that's probably next on the list, is sort of your cloud migration, your ability to adapt into the new world. There's a number of vendors that we have that are still stuck terrestrial. They've got 60 million lines of code in a security product, and they zero hope of making it containerized or migrate out to the cloud. And you see that their time is numbered, but yet still, as a large enterprise, you have that deployed everywhere. So you've got to figure out what your migration strategy is. And I think that's what vendors can do, is bring forward those strategies, yet give us some kind of transition forward. And I think, Signet did a good job there. They've got an endpoint strategy, but they've also got a managed services strategy and a few other things that they've got from a whole stack perspective that we really liked. We also liked that they were smaller, and that helped us because we got a bit more attention on some of the things that we need, because like any large enterprise, you have some customizations, if you will, that you need taken care of. And if you went with someone like, CrowdStrike or someone like that, they're not going to change their product for you. So that's something that we consider.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Skin in the game is oftentimes what we're asked for also, and people try to gauge a question of like, how large are we in your world, right? And how important are we? So that's interesting coming from the vendor side, that is. So, all right, great. Yeah, so obviously the cost side of things are things that we see as a vendor also kind of the service and support kind of characteristics of what this will take to implement. Is it a partner implementation? Is it a core organization implementation, or is it just a regular SaaS offering that's just onboarded? So that's I think that's all really good information. I know a lot of financial services folks that we work with are coming up with questionnaires now more than I think I've ever seen before. So do you guys kind of go through that process as well?
Yeah. I'm in a few groups with some of our competitors, and I know that they send out, the classic ISO questionnaires and checklists. Do you have all these practices, that kind of stuff. I think that's something that our governance organization does as part of vendor management, but that's not necessarily how we select vendors, right? I mean, what we're looking for are people that can, one, just generally have a decent reputation for security. I think that's a minimum, but I think whether or not they can adapt to our environment, like as an example, we don't want to use all of Signet's stack. There's pieces of that we have in other products already, and because we're huge, we've already deployed them. So we'll use the parts that we want. We want to make sure the vendor will support us, even if we basically pick and choose through that. And you're not going to get that with a giant company. They want you to use the whole Carbon Black suite, right? That's not as easy. So I think from a checklist perspective, yeah, but it's really not sort of first from our perspective. I would have to go back and say I think finances do heavily enter into it, but mostly it's sort of forward compatibility and technical compatibility, ability to scale with our company as well.
Okay. Yeah, how is the kind of the multi, obviously a lot of people are heading into the multi-cloud realm, right? And we see a lot of vendors out in the industry kind of lining up to kind of join up with each other strategically. And obviously there are 4 or 5 pretty major cloud vendors out there. Is that impacting you yet, or are you seeing signs of
Yeah.
kind of multi-cloud playing a role in your near future?
It is interesting because a lot of people that I know, even competitors, have gone full Microsoft or full Amazon. They go all in on a cloud. We are multi-cloud.
Mhm.
And if you talk to Europeans, I think they're a little bit more concerned about vendor lock-in than Americans, which is kind of, I'm making a huge generalization, but it's fairly accurate. You can see how they're more concerned about privacy and whether the data leaks and all that kind of stuff. And a multi-cloud strategy, they still feel like holds a bit of that power back, right? So they can not get vendor lock-in, and that vendor lock-in is a very scary thing for a large enterprise. You don't want that. But as
Right.
an operations guy, I'll tell you, having to maintain now 3 new cloud environments, both in public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, across different ecosystems, and with my existing on-prem systems, that's like 12 different data centers for the same data center I had 5 years ago, right? So each one has a different support model. Amazon and Microsoft are drastically different in the way that you actually manage them from a management plane perspective. So as an ops perspective, I wish hybrid or multi-cloud were easier, but yeah, that is what I think large enterprises still want to hold, is the ability to support at least 3 or 4 of the big cloud providers.
Yeah. Yeah. As one person said to me, I refuse to participate in a hostage scenario. So certainly understand.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Okay, great. Um, yeah, I mean, we can, chat about a couple of other things, and then we can kind of get on to kind of the second phase of this. Um, you know, we offer as a global systems integrator, we do a lot of things for people as well, and for our channel partners. So like free zero trust pre-assessments for organizations to help them in conjunction with some of these tools, for example, to kind of and now that the federal mandates are out there, so there are a number of things people are having to do. Are things like that a plus for you, or do you guys look at that as beneficial when you're looking at a product service,
Yeah.
or is that not really viable?
Generally what happens is you have the large vendors that have a hook into senior leadership with zero trust or some other term, right? So
Right.
zero trust came onto our radar as far as that goes. But as you know, each of the big vendors has their own spin on zero trust, and it can vary drastically depending on their DNA. Some are network focused, some are endpoint focused, some are
Right.
application focused, and each one has a different solution. So getting someone that can help map zero trust into an organization is very important, because it's still very buzzword, right? So I'll tell you that our organization has almost all of the traits of zero trust already, but our senior leadership absolutely must have zero trust, right?
Mhm.
So explaining that difference between, okay, here's what zero trust really means from this perspective into our existing environment. Yeah, I think that's something that is evolving. We're looking for
Okay.
that to grow.
Okay. Yeah, we do a lot of those kinds of things, just because people have asked us for them. Quite frankly, we even do a not just for zero trust, but for 5 or 6 different analyses. But when you're going through looking at people's existing architecture and topology, you're trying to develop prioritization for what initial assets are available for on-ramp. You're analyzing basically all user authentication, authorization, policy, federation prerequisites, kind of all that. It's no easy thing. So when we go into it and people ask us even to just do the first free part with them,
Yeah.
it's not a decision we take lightly either, because it's a lot of work. So, but yeah, but we are seeing, as the Fed is kicking up now, the regulations even have been changing the last couple of weeks, to include all these new things, especially since we saw the White House mandates and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's another topic too that's kind of an interesting one that came up with SolarWinds and some of the others, that if you've got vendors on the phone or people working with vendors, and that's actual security of the vendors, and how do you monitor that for your vendor compromise, things like that. So it's come up lately that we're now responding to events in our partners. And we're starting to figure out what is the shared responsibility model between the vendor and ourselves. So while you're engaging with the vendor, you always have to wonder how they're using your data and how they're accessing your data, or if you're getting software supplies from them, how you're getting them. You know, it was tinfoil hat conspiracy theory to think that people would replace chips on routers, but that actually happened. And you know, as a global financial company, we start to worry about those things, right? And you have to pick a vendor like that too. So,
yeah, it is. The world is probably worse than we think. Even, who knows? But that's one thing we continually find. So,
so let's do some questions. You know,
that'd be great.
We actually do have a question. Vance, thank you so much for asking. More and more, we are being driven to work through the vendor management teams for qualification. How, as an executive, do you work with vendor management teams? And do you feel that you may be missing out on cool technology if folks are unsuccessful with the vendor management team?
Yeah, I mean, for a large enterprise, you're pushed into more of an RFP process, right? So for anything that's a significant purchase, you've got to go through vendor management, and they even don't want to really talk to the vendor outside of that process. We've got all sorts of policy on it. And I think the biggest thing is, you know, as the person that's technical or business that's selecting the vendor at the end, you have basically 2 times to really influence the process. The beginning, of course, to set up the requirements and figure out what you actually want out of the RFP. So what are the things that you want the solutions to deliver, your input that goes in the process. I think people that are experienced working with vendors on both sides realize that you've got to influence that before you start the RFP process, or you've already lost, right? So that's a lot of it, is a lot of what we ask for in an RFP also, you know, determines the solution. So getting ahead of that, getting in front of that, I think is critical. And I think the second time that we have really is after the first response comes back, you start getting questions, technical questions, other questions about what solution you are to deliver and how you answer that. I think the creativity of that and how completely you answer that varies. We even had people, large like Splunk, refuse to even return an RFP, and we're not a small organization, so that was actually a little insulting. But I think that's sort of an example where they come back and you're supposed to provide questions. And we have that dialogue. So that's your second time. But I think that's really the last time that I would get involved, or other managers would get involved outside of the vendor management team. Because after that point, it becomes more about financials. They'll ask us, do they satisfy the requirements? Is the solution going to be compatible? Do you have any strong preference one way or the other? And then it really does get turned over to a financial decision. And I think that as a large enterprise is put in place as a policy to protect us. And I think there are ways around that, like, you know, single source solutions, things like that, where only one company offers it and such. But really, you don't want to enter into those type of contracts. You want some kind of price competitiveness to keep the contract going. I think that the next time, of course, is a renewal, usually 3 or 5 year contract. They'll bounce into it again, and then we'll go through a selection. I think that's also another good time to re-engage with the team.
Okay, great. Hopefully, Vance, that answers your question. All right. Additional Q&A, Courtney? Okay, I think we're okay for now.
I think people want whiskey. I think you made too good a thing right after us.
Oh, okay. I hate to be the one keeping everybody from lunch or dinner or whatever. Yeah. So, okay.
There's another question that came in. Do you do an ROI analysis? And I'm not sure if that was for who that was for, but.
Okay.
And we do, yeah, I mean, we do ROI analysis. We also do cost benefits, and we do a risk analysis. It's all part of the process that we have, largely driven by vendor management. From my perspective, when I look at a technology, I'm looking at a few different angles, right? So we have cost benefit. So, is it going to apply to the whole enterprise? What's it going to be like year over year? What's the support requirement? I, of course, have a huge operations requirement. It's not just about installing the thing, it's about running the thing. So I do a lot of analysis on what the staffing and ongoing maintenance would result from the project. So that enters into it as far as the financials go. Then, of course, risk mitigation. There's a spectrum that you can get from certain technologies. Some are very lightweight, some are very intense. Some take a lot of integration to get done. And this is often limited by an overall project budget. So, we have a certain amount per year for large projects. So do you really want to spend all of it on one or two technologies, or do you want to go with 10 and then have 10 more proof of concepts? So we do a lot of that balancing several times a year as far as a portfolio goes. And we look for the highest sort of risk mitigation. We have a whole governance organization that has a complex risk modeling profile. And a lot of the insurers and other financials have a similar risk management organization where they go in and try to identify their largest risks and then get solutions to help mitigate it, try to knock it down from a critical to a medium or a low.
Okay. Great answer. Can I just ask one last question? I kind of have one along these lines as well. As we're working with a lot of people, though, we do a lot of advisory work and stuff like that, but they'll also often ask us, there are a lot of tools out there from a governance perspective that help them define the gaps, right? And whether they're into M&A activity or it's all about compliance or whatever else, we're starting to get, tooled up, not only with the hardcore tool, best of breed folks like Signet, but folks like the Arcs Nimbuses and folks like that are coming up with kind of the cyber rating, doing enterprise scans and stuff like that. And it's getting pushed down, we're finding more and more. Have you guys ever, obviously the bit sites and the risk recons and all those guys have been around a while, but there's kind of a new breed of analysis that's kind of going on now, turning that into financial kind of data. So have you seen anything like that?
Yep, we do some of that, and we have we also have cyber insurance as an example. So
right.
we even get insured, even though we're a large insurer. We even insure militaries, and I think
Wow.
yeah, a small thing. I think from that perspective, yeah, we've had a few of the big like PwC and EY come in and want to do a full enterprise assessment on that, and that's all been shot down. I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Since we're heavily regulated, as are other people, the more data you make, the more data you end up turning over to regulators, right? Or you get exposed and hand around. So you want to do this in a planned, thoughtful way, but the more you create from a risk visibility perspective, you also need to mitigate that risk. So you kind of make your own thing. And I think you see this in organizations where governance is more split from operations. Some combine them, they have got one big security org. Ours is more split. So you'll have a governance organization that's very risk focused that goes and helps to identify this. And they might run through an activity like that, but it won't get down to the level that I live in, which is operations. So globally, how do you actually apply all of this? Where are your gaps? That's a whole different type of assessment that I think we see now. And now we're starting to get into that with zero trust, because I think people want to do more of that to help map us into zero trust. And we see that with some of the foreign regulatory things, but they're going more country by country. So we might answer that same thing, but for North America or for the UK, as an example, with their cyber, and then with Italy and a few of the other countries that actually have people that want to come in and evaluate the security of the geography.
Right.
And that's also challenging because we're a large enterprise and we share a lot of systems. So, and you mentioned regulations, but those are just the US ones. So we have to unify 60 or so geographies together as far as regulation. And of course, we have also Iran and Russia and China as places that we do business, which is interesting for an American.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I think we've both been in places where we've managed and overseen certs, all over the world. So yeah, it's an interesting scenario.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, that's a very comprehensive answer. Thanks very much for that. I think, are there other questions from anybody out there currently? Or are we pretty good? Because if so, Todd, we may be able to give the mic back to you, and we can maybe start doing a little taste testing.
Absolutely. And I'll be very brief again to introduce Josh Gardner, the head distiller at Ranger Creek Brewing and Distilling. Josh has been, and correct anything, of course, Josh, but you've been with Ranger Creek about 6 years, so since 2016. And Josh is responsible, and I love this quote, bringing the grain all the way to your glass. He's also one of the founding members of the Texas Whiskey Association and the Texas Whiskey Trail. So I don't want to be between you and your whiskey any longer. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And like I say, if you need any more information about SINET, by all means, just contact Courtney, Jim, or myself. We'll be happy to set you up. But Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you.